Senator Lyder.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I think the Honorable Attorney General is very confused this evening because he turns to us and says that he cannot understand why the opposition will not vote in favor of reducing this tax 3% to 2%. Mr. Vice President, the opposition will only vote in favor of abolishing the property tax altogether, Mr. President. That is what we'll vote in favor of. Mr. President, so I thank you for this opportunity to contribute here this evening. And of course, Mr. President, a lot has already been said from all sides, from the independent bench, from the government side, and from the opposition side. And I have to commend and congratulate my colleagues on this side for completely tearing apart the debate from the government side and showing the injustice, the inequity, the unfairness and the breach of democracy that this government continues to perpetrate through the bringing of this property tax, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are here debating the Property Tax Amendment Bill 2024. And in this debate, we have already, and I have already heard a lot of misdirections, a lot of misleading bits of information. And it started off from the very beginning when the Honorable Minister of Finance came here once more, like they did in the other place, to try to bring this narrative that the United National Congress was going to bring a property tax to the nation. The Honorable Minister of Finance started off by indicating some phantom tax that was laid in the Parliament by then Winston Dukaran. That never had a second reading, that was never debated, and then says that we are coming to bring property tax. Then the Honorable Minister of Finance doubles down and comes here along with the Minister of Tourism and doubles down to talk about Larry Hawaii. In fact, they're singing the Larry Hawaii song now 2 weeks.
Mr. President, on a point of order, Standing Order 53(1)B, this is now tedious repetition.
We have a very narrow 3-point amendment to focus on. If you can keep your arguments towards those, that would be great.
And I know you allow me to have an opening. I know you allow me to have an opening, and I know you will allow me to respond to the Honorable Minister of Tourism, because he too had a bite of the cherry. You're stopping me, but he doubles down, so he didn't get stopped on tedious repetition? No, Mr. Vice President, I'm responding to the Honorable Minister of Tourism today.
Senator Lyder. Senator Lyder. Senator Lyder, I'm on my legs. Silence is to be observed when I'm here. Tedious repetition at this stage of the debate does kick in. A lot of to and fro's already happened. Please keep your arguments relative to the matter at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Because I am responding to the Honourable Minister of Tourism, what I will do is quote something different that nobody else quoted, coming from Larry Hawaii. Because you see, in the same article that we saw in the Trinidad Guardian from Gail Alexander on August the 22nd, 2015, we heard various parts being quoted, but I wanted to quote 2 parts that wasn't quoted so that I can respond to the Minister of Tourism, Mr. Vice President, and thank you for allowing me. Mr. President, the Minister Hawaii, and this is why it is so relevant, because we are in election season. The PNM is coming scampering here to this Parliament to try to mamagai the population that they're doing something to alleviate the pain of this draconian tax from 3 to 2%. So it is obvious they have set out their talking heads, Mr. President, on the outside, and of course their representatives on the inside here to try to hoodwink the population into thinking that the UNC was bringing property tax. So as we are in election season, let me quote the then Minister Hawaii. He said, "While I understand that in a political campaign, some people get carried away, and in the lines between truth and fiction becomes blurred." Mr. President, oh God, today we see fiction from this government today, and it is not blurred, it is clear. It is clear fiction, Mr. President. And so marking what appears to be deliberately distorting statements to create panic among citizens and our business community, which is irresponsible and will ultimately hurt people, like what this PNM government is doing with this property tax, ultimately hurting people. But I want to also quote something else again so that I can respond to the Minister of Tourism. You see, the Minister of Tourism speaks about consultation and about this government having consultation with a whole group of people on this property tax. Here's what Hawaii said. I would emphasize that I have consulted with the business community on the sequencing of an industrial land tax and subsequently land and building taxes on residential and commercial properties. And the feedback which I have received are, one, that we should consider carefully the tax burden on individuals and businesses and the effect that it can have on new investment. I will stop there because my colleague said the second part. I don't want to be repetitious. Mr. President, and that is it. There was no implementation of property tax under the United National Congress. There's no evidence whatsoever to purport that property tax was ever brought back by the United National Congress when they were in power. Between 2010 and 2015, Mr. President, not a single red cent was collected by the then People's Partnership government on property tax. And Mr. President, let me put it to you, we consulted with the people. We listened to the people. When the Honorable Minister of Tourism spoke about consultation, it's obviously he was wearing earmuffs because he didn't hear a word that the people said. He didn't hear the cries from the people. He didn't hear the cries from business. He didn't hear the cries from the poor man. And all of that, they have to wear on their sleeves today, Mr. Vice President, because they have not listened to the people. They are still coming with the draconian property tax. So, Mr. President, I will move on from there. You see, Mr. President, I continue to listen to the nonsense spewed out surrounding this bill. I listened in the other place. I listened attentively while I was doing my research. I wanted to hear what was said in the other place, Mr. President. And just like in the other place here today, all sorts of meandering around, misquoting persons. I heard the Honourable Minister of Tourism misquoting a person from local government, a chairman in local government, attempting to score political points. Mr. Vice President, when I looked in the other place, we had a Prime Minister who took his entire 40 minutes with not one reference to the piece of legislation that we are debating here today. He wasn't stopped. I've been stopped, but he wasn't stopped. But it's all right. But this is the same Prime Minister, Mr. President, that was, when in opposition, was vehemently against against any property tax. But yet coming back here today in the other place, and now his colleagues upstairs here, to tell you that the property tax is coming and it'll be good for you. Take our medicine. Mr. Vice President, when the PNM is playing these games, we know and we are clear in the UNC that 1 year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the UNC has been against property tax, and we will continue to stand against property tax. So, Mr. President, allow me to take a few minutes to get to the actual bill, where we didn't hear much on the other side speak about the bill. But when I look at Clause 2 of this bill, which proposes significant changes to Section 52 and 53 of the parent legislation, specifically regarding the powers of the minister. And again, I will not quote what my honorable colleague, Senator Lakshmi Dayal, indicated with 52.1 and 52.2, but I will, for the record, lodge my concern with proposed Section 53A, which allows the minister to make changes to the schedule subject to negative resolution in Parliament. Now, Mr. President, this quite simply means that the rate of taxation falls to the discretion of the Minister of Finance. Not just this outgoing Minister of Finance, but any Minister of Finance that comes in has this discretion, Mr. President. Mr. President, tax is a very serious engagement that directly impacts the pockets of citizens of this country. And it is incredibly important that any tax regime is robust, yet flexible, and at the same point in time, democratic, Mr. President. Not by the hands of someone who sits on the executive arm of the state. Mr. President, when you look at several jurisdictions, I know no one has said this, when we look at several jurisdictions, such as Canada and Australia, for instance, it is the federal government through the legislatures, Mr. Vice President, that set guidance on the rate of taxation on both income and property. And furthermore, the rate of tax on immovable assets is often left to the deliberations of local government, whether it be provincial or state. Now, of course, Mr. President, I know that we may be small in stature, we may not have as much population as Canada and these big countries, Mr. President, but it doesn't take away from the value of having schedule changes like these proposed here in this bill today, subject to affirmative resolution, Mr. President. And I understand, I know this government is trying to cut through, they say they're trying to cut through red tape. Right? They're trying to cut through red tape, but they're still putting us as a nation at risk, putting the government at risk and putting any minister of finance at risk. Mr. President, and this seems to continue, this is a continuation of these exorbitant powers that have been granted to the Minister of Finance, that we come here week after week debating various pieces of legislation, and I'm not going to get in depth with any at all. But when I look at what happened in the procurement legislation that gave the minister sweeping powers to change anything on the schedule that he wanted to be exempt from being under the purview of the procurement regulator, then I come here today, I think about Clause 2 here today. What I think, Mr. President, about a Minister of Finance who has the power to appoint a Director General and a Board of Directors on the Revenue Authority, Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority, I once more again, Mr. Vice President, think about the powers being placed on the Minister of Finance again today in Clause 2 on the proposed change to Section 53A, when we see the Minister of Finance having the ability to change the rate of tax.
Without coming to Parliament.
Without coming to Parliament. Mr. President, but listen to this. Today, we've seen it going from 3% down to 2%. Maybe it could go to 1%. But what is to stop any Minister of Finance, not this outgoing minister, any Minister of Finance, from going to 4 and 5% after, let's say they were able to mamagai the population into getting another 5 years. Oh, God help us. But God forbid that would happen. But what is to stop the minister after the election from going up to 4 to 5%? And you know, I listened attentively to the Minister of Finance in this debate today. And I listened to a statement that he made. And it struck out to me how profound this matter is about him having the power, he or she having the power to change his taxes. Let me quote what the minister said. The minister said that because of the confusion with the citizens, obviously because of the evaluation, the flawed evaluation process, that we decided to phase it in. Listen to the words. We decided to phase it in. So this is what we're doing. We phase it in, the tax. We come in, we're going on to 2%. Yippee, we cutting the tax, but we phasing it in.
Hoodwinking people.
Hoodwinking the people. So if you get our next term, you go phase it up to another 3, then phase it up to 4, and then phase it up to 5, and phase it up to 7, Mr. Vice President.
He's capable of doing it.
And is capable of doing it, Mr. President. That is why it's dangerous.
And they ain't right yet?
Yeah.
They ain't right yet?
You see, Mr. President, this is a completely undemocratic process. When a political figure and a minister can tax the citizens of the country however he please without the oversight of the Parliament. And Mr. Vice President, this is an attack on our democracy, Mr. Vice President. A complete attack on our democracy. Some people may say that it's a cynical tout, but to those who doubt that this PNM government can actually stoop to these low levels, Mr. President, let me remind you other important matters regarding this property tax. You see, and all of this came up in the debate today. The government has marked this property tax as saying that it is almost a saving grace for local government. That now, all of a sudden, there will be so much more money coming to the coffers of the corporations for the burgesses. The minister stood up here and said how his experiences where he has heard for people in Maraval calling for roads and drainage, but there's no money. Sand and gravel, but there's no money. He stood up here and he said this today, Mr. Vice President, and told us about all the great things that will come. We heard it in the other place as well. But Mr. President, let me tell you this. Mr. President, they have painted themselves as these righteous persons, self-righteous persons who's coming to save local government. In fact, we even heard the Honorable Prime Minister quote saying that he's not afraid to lose an election over property tax. This was quoted on the 19th of March. Well, he better be afraid, because he's coming to lose this election on this property tax when the people have to actually pay these exorbitant fees. But he says, we are not afraid to be voted out doing the right thing for this country. And I make no bones about that, because we believe that we are doing the right thing for the country. Enough people will see we are doing the right thing. And as I said, the Minister of Finance came here to say we're doing the right thing. We put in more money for the burgesses in all these corporations because we're going to be collecting property tax. Mr. Vice President, but it's a strange thing. When you take the time to look at the debates in the other place and you do your research, I was able to get some information and call up my colleague MP Saddam Hussein, who delivered brilliantly in the other place. But I was able to call up the MP for some clarity, and you know what he told me, Mr. Vice President? He reminded me that the Senate Act of number 11 of 2022, the Miscellaneous Provisions Local Government Reform Act, in section 1086, it says, and I quote, where estimates have been approved for use by a corporation for a particular year, and the corporation is in receipt of sums collected from the property taxes for use by the corporations, the sums shall be offset from the releases due to the corporation that year.
And they were getting the money.
Mr. Vice President, you know what that means? It had no extra money for no corporation. It is an offset that is happening, Mr. President. So you see the same sand and gravel that the people in Maraval couldn't get, they still ain't going to get it. You see the same roads that they wasn't going to get up in Diego Martin Northeast, they're still not going to get those roads, Mr. Vice President. So not only the PNM has flip-flopped on their property tax stance when they've gone from opposition to government, not only have they tried to bring disastrous legislation that cuts the parliament out of deciding on the actual tax, but this government has been convenient with their words when it comes to how the property tax will actually help the local government entities, Mr. Vice President. And as the old saying go, this PNM has a knack of playing smart with foolishness, Mr. Vice President. They have a knack of doing that. They're good at it. And that is why, Mr. President, I now turn to what we in the UNC consider as a completely flawed evaluation process regarding this property tax. Now, a lot has been said about the flawed process. I'm going to take it in a different angle today, Mr. Vice President, because I think we can speak so much about the flawed process in so many different angles that it's not hard for me not to trip up on any of my colleagues here today. Mr. Vice President, I want to start off with a quote that I got from the United Nations Human Settlements Programs Land and Property Tax Policy Guide of 2011. It says that one of the strengths of land and property taxes should be the connection the citizens can make between the payment and the local services rendered by the authorities. As taxpayers seek stability, certainty, clarity, and fairness in the tax system, Mr. Vice President. And it is not only that the citizens of this country are not clear on the collections or the use of the taxes, but serious concerns have arisen over the valuations. And that is why we are here today. The Minister of Finance indicated that there's chaos. The Minister of Tourism indicated it's a complete flawed process. He has admitted it. They have admitted it, Mr. President. So when the government comes with clause 2 of this bill, Most of the countries in the dark when it comes to these evaluations. So you could lower the tax from 3 to 2, 2 to 1. But if you are not clear on the way and the criteria and the methodology in which your tax, your property is being valued, you still feel uncomfortable paying 1 or 2%. Yes, people are going to feel a sense of relief that they're paying 7,000 instead of 5,000, but they shouldn't have to pay 5,000 at all when they get to find out that it is a flawed process. Mr. Vice President, they should be certain. And then the Minister of Finance comes here to tell us, oh no, there's a methodology. We have a methodology. Look, we consulted with the International Property Tax Institute. We got 57-page document guide of advice, right, on how we could, look at modern standard shack. Any of those people come and walk in a shack in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Vice President? Any of those people in the international come and walk inside of my house to see if my house is modern or old? No, they got some advice. But let me tell you this, Lou. They got some advice, but listen to who getting the advice. I want you to know who's getting the advice. Because, Mr. Vice President, in my conversation with MP Saddam Hussein, he also exposed something in the other place, and he shared the information with me, and I think it very important for the sake of the Senate, as we have independent senators here with us today, to hear the findings that came out of a memorandum that is in the possession of Saddam Hussein, a memorandum from the Valuation Division of the Ministry of Finance. I want you all to hear this. You all need to hear this. Yes, I'm going to quote what was said. You see, Mr. President, from the Valuation Assistant 3 Committee to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, dated November the 12th, 2018, regarding a complaint with respect to the hiring procedure of the contract position Graduate Valuation Surveyor 2, Ministry of Finance, Valuation Division. And I quote, "This letter serves as a complaint into the hiring procedure of Graduate Valuation Surveyor 2 by the Ministry of Finance." As the fellow have to come by your house to value your house, yeah? Let me tell you. And it goes on to say, and I quote, "The advertisement of Graduate Valuator Surveyor 2 indicates in the knowledge section that the applicant should possess a Bachelor's of Science degree in estate surveying or a bachelor degree property valuation management and a successful completion of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors." So we're going good so far, right? Those are pretty stringent qualifications. It goes on to quote again, "None of the candidates invited to the interview possessed the successful completion of the final examination of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. This is a fundamental prerequisite at this level given the duties and responsibilities. All applicants should have been disqualified from the interview and the position re-advertised seeking persons with accredited RICS degrees in valuating surveying." I hope the Minister of Finance can clear this up for us.
Mr. Vice President, point of order 46(1), is it?
Yes.
I fail to see which clause of the bill, the 3-clause bill, this adventure refers to. Relevance, Mr. Vice President. If you're doing as such, can you read it in and bring it in tightly, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, because we beg the relevance because it is actually outside of the 3 clauses at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The mere fact that every single person, including the Minister of Tourism and the Minister of Finance, has spoken at length about the flawed valuation process makes this extremely relevant, because these are the persons coming to value your property, Mr. Vice President.
48(1), I did not refer to any flawed valuation process. That is an irrelevant contribution. 46(1), I'm sorry. Member Lyder. Tread cautiously on that point and make it relevant.
Okay, so I definitely quoted the Minister of Tourism, who said there was a problem with evaluation, and many of the other colleagues behind me who also had concerns about it, and of course the rest of the citizens in this country who bawling and screaming about evaluation being flawed. So I will just wrap this up. I'll say the final part is important to hear this, right? And listen to the interview panel of those valuators coming to value your house.
Mr. President, 46.1, this is not a debate on the valuation of land. Point of order. This is a debate on the property tax amendment bill.
Member Lyder, you are currently wasting your time. Silence is observed when the presiding officer is on his legs. I ask that you keep it relevant and tight. You said you were winding up and making your punch. Make your punch.
It is extremely relevant because I'm responding to everybody who spoke about the evaluation process. These are the evaluators who are key in the evaluation process. And it's important for the nation to know you have a bunch of unqualified persons valuing your properties today.
46.1.
Senator Lyder, I ask that you move on from this point.
Thank you, Mr. So, in closing that, Mr. President, that is why when we look at sections 52 and 53A, allowing them to move from 3 to 2%, there still is a serious concern, Mr. President, because we have heard many persons have said today about their personal stories in this chamber today, about the experiences that they've had with their friends, their uncle, their auntie, who will come from a wooden house, whatever. So many people have had their experiences. So I am going to be allowed to give you my personal experience now, Mr. Vice President.
Mr. President, point of order, 53.1b, extremely tedious repetition.
Senator Lyder, in your winding up, make your case clear and your points precise, please.
Mr. Vice President, so despite the fact that we are going from 3 to 2%, I still have to grapple with the fact, Mr. Vice President, that I don't know how the valuation has been done on my property. The minister told us at the beginning what was their methodology, which was to consult with some international persons. But there is nothing else in what the minister says that gives me the comfort, because I'm responding to him now what he said the methodology was. So I can respond to him, no tedious repetition. And I am saying to you, I don't understand how my property, where I live, could be valued at $300 and just short of $400,000, right? The man next door to me, who have a same house like me, who I know is a bigger businessman than me, he being valued at $250,000. We have a widow opposite me being valued at $150,000 a year. All of us on the same street with similar properties. And I heard the Minister of Tourism speak about certain houses getting 2 valuations. Yes, he indicated that certain houses got 2 valuations. Yes, and I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, on my next street, there is a house that got 3 valuations, and none of them were in sync with the other. And that is why we say this is a completely flawed process. 3 valuations came to his mailbox, Mr. Vice President, and that is on the same street. The minister, as I said, the Minister of Tourism admitted that there were homes that got 2 valuations. And just like many of them, we have never had the luxury.
I don't know what, this is beyond extremely tedious now. It's the same point over and over. 53, point of order, tedious repetition.
Senator Lyder, you have approximately 12 minutes remaining. Yes. Use it wisely and try to bring some new content and wrap up your debate accordingly.
So, Mr. Vice President, the purpose of us coming here today was because the minister admitted there was confusion in the evaluation process, right? No, I'm moving on to the next point. So allow me to move on to my next point. So we came here today because of that, but there is nothing in this piece of legislation that we are seeing here in section 52, section 53A, that shows anything that will assist in rectifying this problem of the evaluation. A simple knee-jerk reaction of going from 3 to 2%, Mr. Vice President. You see, when I look at other jurisdictions, We see proper efforts to protect both citizens and institutions. Mr. President, for example, in Belgium, tax is calculated by the Belgian Measurements and Assessments Administration based on your index cadastral income. The property tax to be paid is a percentage of the cadastral income, which is simply the average normal income which an owner should receive each year from his or her house. This percentage and the amount of the tax to be paid varies because they depend on various criteria, transparent criteria that citizens can take comfort in, Mr. President, including the property and its geographical location. Mr. Vice President, cadastral income is not assessed on the basis of real value of a property. A new house with a significant value may have a lower cadastral income than all commercial properties in the city center if it doesn't generate any income. So it is clear, transparent, Mr. President, in the evaluation process. But Mr. Vice President, you know what is most important? How do you become a surveyor in Belgium to be able to provide a transparent process that we are not seeing here today? We certainly are not convinced by what the minister has indicated as having some advice from an international agency. Let me tell you how you become a surveyor on behalf of the government in Belgium. According to the government information systems, the conditions for a practitioner are...
Senator Lyder,
Yeah.
you already expounded the qualifications for this same matter. You must understand you are in the realm of tedious repetition at this point. You have made that point already.
Sorry? Mr. Vice President, but I want to close this part on evaluation. I want to close this part because I know Senator Lachmedial spoke about evaluation when it comes to stamp duty, etc. So I will add to that by saying, Mr. Vice President, even in the bank system in Trinidad, when you are given a loan for your property, they appoint an accredited, fully qualified evaluator like a Lyndon Scott or Brent Augustus to come to your property, to evaluate your property, to walk in your property, to walk inside your house, to see the interior of your house. If you have a new kitchen, if you have a leaking faucet, a leaking toilet. Mr. Vice President, nobody came to my house. Nobody walked in my house. I have a 7-foot wall, Mr. Vice President. A 7-foot wall. And unless they took a ladder and climbed up on the wall, Mr. Vice President, they didn't see inside.
How many times will you say that?
Mr. President, Standing Order 53(1)B. We've heard this before.
Senator Lyder, unless you have new points to make, I suggest you continue on the wrapping up of your debate.
Mr. Vice President, you know, it must be very painful. It must be very painful to try to justify what they are doing to the citizens of this country. And that's why they will attempt to silence me, because I am speaking on behalf of not just the 300,000 persons that voted for the United National Congress, not on behalf of just the 300,000 who regret they voted for the PNM, but I'm speaking on behalf of all citizens in this country who are now crying and are now screaming because of this property tax. So they're frightened, they don't want to hear what I have to say, but it's all right. They don't have to hear any more of what I have to say. You know why? Because I will quote to you what was said by other people in this country. So you know it's not the United National Congress telling you this alone, because they will want come to make you believe there's a UNC against property tax. The UNC, is for, it wants to oppose for opposing's sake. That the UNC don't want to see us go from 3% down to 2%. That is the narrative. But Mr. President, all you have to do is look in the Trinidad Newsday dated March 17, 2024, entitled Homeowners Want Clarity on Erratic Property Tax Valuations. And listen to what it says. Arthur Raymond, I quote, Arthur Raymond, Managing Director of Raymond and Pear Limited, a company of chartered valuation surveyors, real estate agents, and property consultants, said that there were so many discrepancies because of the mass valuation approach, which would produce a certain percentage of erratic evaluations. Not the few that the Honorable Minister of Finance said in his opening salvo. When he said, oh, it's just the fella that meet me down by the plaza, just the guy that living in St. Clair. No, Mr. President, a big percentage of erratic valuations. Mr. President, a former member of the Senate, Helen Drayton, writes in the Trinidad Guardian, listen to this, on March 24th, yesterday, in a column entitled Property Tax, Equity, Equality, and Accountability. Mr. President, this is the quote. In the exercise of public functions, all citizens have the right to equality of treatment. If that right had been observed in the implementation of this property tax that we are here debating today, there would not have been any disparities. The decision-making process and planning were not based on a governance model for citizens-centeredness that would have resulted in a systematic and comprehensive approach to the rollout, which we can't roll out here today because we're running here to change things from 3 to 2% and give them an extra month, as Clause 2 says. And here it is, showing arrogance. Oh God, that word arrogance. And the impression that the citizens' criticism is anti-government and above reproach sends a message that citizens are bothersome pests because they complain about the lack of accountability and transparency in this process, even with the 3 down to the 2%, Mr. Vice President.
Arrogance.
Such postures have done nothing to convey government's good intentions on what good they have done. Mr. President, you know the funny part? Let me tell you this. I don't know if it have a little piece of jealousy or whatever going on here. But you have to hear this one. This is from a former Minister of Finance from the PNM, Mariano Brong. I don't know if he might become the next shadow Minister of Finance while they go into opposition. But Dr. Brong went on a national radio panel on March the 18th, 2024, which included another one of our colleagues here, an independent senator. I will not call his name. Right? And the concerns, he highlighted the same exact concerns of lack of transparency, highlighted that property owners receive a letter with one line addressing the annual rental value and no explanation on how the valuation divisions got there. Do you think they know that the government consulted with some international body? Do you think they know what the criteria is? I'm holding in my hand, I can't put it up for you all to see, but I'm holding in my hand the exact same document.
Mr. President, on a point of order, 46.1. The Senator has been laboring this point, Mr. Vice President.
Just now. Senator Lyder. We have made the point of tedious repetition. We have made the point of the relevance of what you're speaking about to the matter at hand. Both you have veered off very far from the core. You have a few minutes remaining. I ask that in your last 3 minutes, you make your conclusion and your summation without rambling about those 2 points.
President, you don't pelt stone at barren tree. So I know that's why they give me this today. You don't pelt stone at barren tree. I'm giving the whole nation the lowdown on what this government is doing with property tax. And I hold it in my hand right here with no explanation as to how I get this value. And thousands of citizens in this country holding the same paper with no idea of how they get this valuation. So, Mr. President, as I close, as I wrap up now, because I think I've done sufficient damage to this poor an excuse of an argument here today for property tax, Mr. President. So this is not the UNC. We have heard it from other persons, even PNM members, past independent senators. We hear it from various chambers of commerce, and most of all, we've heard the cries of the thousands of people who have been crying out in desperation for somebody to come and stop this government. But we know, Mr. Vice President, that this government, as I said earlier, the word arrogance. We know that they will not come and stop this property tax, not because they just feel like it, but because they are in the grips of the IMF and they have no choice now, Mr. Vice President, to bring this property tax. That is what's going on. So, Mr. Vice President, let me tell you this. It is okay. Do not be alarmed. It is not long from now, Mr. Vice President. You, Mr. Vice President, I feel it for you too. You probably got your letter and email as well. And want to know, you're probably asking your colleagues how you get that valuation as well too. I will say to you, Rest your heart. Don't be alarmed. We know that this government's back is against the wall. We know that they have no choice but to call an election soon. And Mr. Vice President, when you see they call that election, the people of this country who have suffered from this property tax will riot with their index finger, cast them into the opposition, Mr. Vice President, and under Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, we will remove this draconian property tax. I thank you.